Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog. I'm going to start out with a couple of small items. I think it's a couple. I didn't take time to count them. I think there's only two, could be three, and then on to the main subject for today. So I'm going to start with Iraq and Iran, specifically Trump's response to the missile attack by Iran on two of our bases in Iraq. It looks like that response could be getting a larger result than just putting the fear of Allah into the Iranians. Here's the headline: revealed, Iraqi armed factions not ready to strike U.S. forces, commanders say. Why are they not ready? Listen. The Iranian-backed Iraqi armed factions are lost, distracted, and unable to effectively strike American forces in Iraq after the loss of two key leaders last week, Shia leaders have told Middle East Eye. That's the name of the publication or the website reporting this news. And of course, the two leaders are Soleimani and Muhandis. Muhandis, in case you forgot, he was the leader of Kataib Hezbollah, one of the proxies of Iran. But commanders of Iranian-backed armed factions in Iraq tell MEE, Middle East Eye, that with the loss of the two leaders, they are now almost paralyzed and would be unable to strike the Americans with real consequence. All spoke to MEE on condition of anonymity. Quote, what happened was a surprise and a nightmare. To lose both men at the same time was a shock to all of us, unquote. A commander who was close to Soleimani and Muhandis told MEE. Quote, the way they were killed, place and timing, all were shocking and painful and terrifying, unquote. As usual, I link to any article that I mention in the description, so I recommend going to the description, getting the link, and reading the entire article, because there's quite a bit more. But that's the gist of it. Next item, impeachment circus update. I gave you either yesterday or the day before a list of 5 senators, 4 Democrats and an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, who are calling on Nancy Pelosi to send over the articles of impeachment from the House. I have today a video of some more Democrats, not just senators, but House Democrats. Now we have House Democrats calling for Nancy Pelosi to send over the articles of impeachment. Here's the video.
I do want to ask you one question about impeachment, having to do with the articles of impeachment that have yet to be delivered to the Senate. There are now some Democratic senators who are suggesting it's time. I want you to listen to Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and Independent Angus King.
I think it's time to turn the articles over. Let's see where the Senate can take it.
I think it is time for the Speaker to send the articles over.
Is it time, Chairman?
I think it is. I mean, I understand what the Speaker is trying to do, basically trying to use the leverage of that to work with Democratic and Republican senators to try to get a reasonable trial, a trial that would actually, show evidence, bring out witnesses. But at the end of the day, just like we control it in the House, Mitch McConnell controls it in the Senate. I think it was perfectly advisable for the Speaker to try to leverage that, to get a better deal. At this point, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And yes, I think it is time to send the impeachment to the Senate and let Mitch McConnell be responsible for the fairness of the trial. He ultimately is.
So add these new Democrats to the old Democrats. It looks like the pressure continues to build, and it has spread from the Senate to the House. We'll have to see how long Nancy Pelosi holds out. But in the end, it really doesn't matter, because I'm not going to post a video, but Mitch McConnell was on the floor of the Senate earlier today, and he was announcing that there will be the trial starting next week, regardless of what Pelosi does. So this national nightmare is probably going to be over by the end of the month, one way or the other, because there will be a trial beginning next week. Let's hope that the Senate simply dismisses the charges for what I talked about in an earlier vlog, failure to prosecute. If the House is not going to send over the articles, the Senate can't just sit there and wait for them, so business will just go on. But I showed you in that video one particular representative, a House representative, Adam Smith, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. You just heard and saw him in that video that I just showed you, urging Nancy Pelosi to send over the articles of impeachment. But look at this headline, quote, "I misspoke," unquote. Representative Adam Smith of Bellevue backtracks after split with Nancy Pelosi on impeachment strategy. U.S. Representative Adam Smith caused a brief ruckus Thursday morning when he publicly broke with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi over her delay in sending articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump to the Senate. But within hours, Smith, Democrat of Bellevue, fell back in line, saying he, quote, misspoke, unquote. That's Nancy Pelosi, and as I have said at least once in an earlier vlog, got to give her credit. She enforces discipline. You say something that Nancy Pelosi doesn't like, and I don't know how she does it. Actually, I do know how she does it, or at least one way how she does it. She threatens to withhold campaign funds. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, she raises a lot of money. Nancy Pelosi is a major fundraiser. She's a fantastic rainmaker when it comes to raising money for the Democratic Party to re-elect House members or to elect new ones. So if she says that you don't get the campaign funds, then you don't get the campaign funds. That's probably what forced a lot of these vulnerable Democrats, the 31 vulnerable Democrats who won in districts that Trump carried, they very likely, at least some of them, are committing, or they already did commit, political suicide by voting for the articles of impeachment. It's got to be especially damaging or embarrassing now that they voted for these articles and Nancy Pelosi is not sending them over. So what was the point of voting for these articles? They are very vulnerable, and you have to wonder why they did it. And this is probably why. Because Nancy Pelosi threatened to withhold campaign funds. So they are in trouble either way. They are at risk of not getting elected, but if they had voted the other way, their chances might be marginally better, but they would not get any money to campaign with except for what they could raise themselves. But apparently a big chunk of their campaign cash came from the Democratic Party. So there you go. You just saw it with Adam Smith, the power of Pelosi. Next item, EU, European Union, pulls statement referring to settlement activity on, quote, disputed, unquote, land. So we're going to the Middle East for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back to the United States for my main subject. The European Union has recalled a statement that referred to land in Area C as, quote, occupied or disputed, unquote. What is Area C? If you're not familiar with it, the Oslo Accords divided the disputed land, and it's all disputed land. Jordan conquered it in 1948 in the Israeli War of Independence. They were occupying it. They were the occupiers. They were occupying it. There was no sovereign. Jordan relinquished their claim to the land, so it's disputed land because there is no sovereign there. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. If I have to learn how to put up those little things in the corner so you can click on it and find an earlier video. I don't know how to do it, but I covered this in more detail in an earlier video. I'm not going to do it now. The point is that Area A of A, B, and C, Area A of areas A, B, and C under control of the Palestinians. Area B under joint control of the Palestinians and the Israelis, and then Area C completely under control of the Israelis. But the European Union has been trying to create facts on the ground. This might be a brief departure, but it's interesting to know. They have been funding Palestinian illegal settlements. They have been providing funds for the Palestinians to build, well, they're just little collections of shacks, no building code, very unsafe, and next to strategic roads to create facts on the ground to make a claim for the Palestinians to get that land in a negotiated settlement, if there ever is. But the fact is that that Area C, is entirely under the control of Israel under the Oslo Accords. Those Palestinians are not supposed to be there. Those illegal structures probably will be removed at some point. And just to make an additional point here, I guess I'm going to have to digress. There is a village, Rawbi, R-A-W-B-I in English, Rawbi, that was built by a Palestinian billionaire, a Palestinian who emigrated to the United States and became a billionaire. He built a village there that was done in cooperation with the Israelis. He worked with Israeli architects. He got the proper permits. The buildings meet the building codes. The apartments are built in an area that the Israelis gave permission to build in. So it's not as if the Israelis are saying that the Palestinians cannot build villages and cannot build housing. They just have to do what an Israeli would have to do, actually apply, get a permit, get permission to build in a certain area. So I just wanted to get that in there. And now just to continue with the quotes, the EU holds that all of the West Bank, including Area C, where the settlements, and these are the Israeli settlements, are located, is not disputed, but rather, quote, occupied territory, unquote, and part of a future Palestinian state, unless determined otherwise through negotiations. Quote, we call on the government of Israel to fully comply with international law and all settlement activity on occupied or disputed lands and related actions, unquote, stated the original release by the EU External Actions Office. The EU has since recalled the statement and reissued it without the word, quote, disputed, unquote, with its spokesman, Peter Stano, clarifying that the word had been placed there in error. Well, the error is that he told the truth. The error is that he committed, well, somebody wants to find a gaffe as accidentally telling the truth. It is disputed land. And a personal irritation for me is that they talk about, well, I have said in the past, Jews are the indigenous population of that area. But I would also mention that until 1948, Jews were living in that area. They were ethnically cleansed by the Jordanians in the 1948 war, kicked them all out. So to say that they have no right to be there, it is just absurd. But to call that occupied territory, and remember that they call Jerusalem occupied territory, they call the Temple Wall, for God's sakes, they call that occupied territory. It is as absurd as their obsession with a two-state solution that I predict is probably not going to happen. And now on to the main subject for today, which is the president's war powers, the president's power, ability as commander-in-chief to use military force against our enemies, specifically in the Middle East. The House, as I'm recording this, is debating a resolution intended to curtail, restrain President Trump's ability to attack our enemies in the Middle East. Now, what is important to realize at the outset is that this is purely symbolic. It's just another way to express displeasure with Trump. A House resolution passed by the House alone has no force or effect. A joint resolution between the House and the Senate would have force and effect, but only if the president signs it. The president would be required to sign it. And of course, if the Senate were to pass with the House a joint resolution, which the Senate, let's be honest, is not going to do, Trump could veto it. So really, it's just as I said, it's just to get at President Trump, to express displeasure with President Trump. But the reason I mention it today is because I want to talk about the president's war powers, because officials from the administration, I think it was Secretary of Defense Esper, and it was Pompeo and one other individual, I don't remember, I think there were three, briefed the House and the Senate yesterday on the provenance of our killing Soleimani. But I want to touch on something that Rand Paul said. He said that Trump has been operating under the authorization for the use of military force, AUMF, that the Senate and House passed to give George W. Bush power to invade Iraq. The current president, and that was a joint resolution, by the way, the current president is operating under that same joint resolution, but Rand Paul is saying that that resolution no longer applies. I think it does, and I'm going to just explain why I think it does. I'm going to read the resolution, and then I'm going to go over the resolution, and I'm going to say why I think it applies. Number one, the resolution doesn't even mention Iraq. It doesn't mention Afghanistan. Those were the two events that were the reason for this authorization for the use of military force being enacted. But the AUMF itself does not mention either country. On that basis alone, obviously, this authorization is meant to have a wider application. Also, there is no expiration date. It's an open-ended authorization. And I'll explain why. Well, you'll see when I read it and then go over it in detail. So let me just read it first. The relevant portion, which is Section 2, Paragraph A. In general, that the President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. That is the operative portion of the authorization to use military force. So now that I've read the entire paragraph, the operative section, so now that I've read the entire operative paragraph, and by the way, again, I linked to the entire document so you can read it yourself. It's only one page. It's a little more than one page, but everything important is on the first page. So let's go through it in detail. That the President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force. But the specifics of what is necessary and appropriate is not defined in this authorization. So the President has some leeway, it would seem, to determine the level of force. I can't imagine that it would not include one drone firing one missile at one car. I would say that carpet bombing the entire airport to get that one car, that would be way beyond necessary and appropriate. But one drone, one missile at one car to take out two people, I I have to say that that has to fall within that definition. Next item here, against those nations, organizations, or persons he determined planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001. It's important that it describes nations, organizations, or persons. So it's not just going after people. He can go after entire nations, and he can also go after organizations. And it's ones that planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks. That would include, which I'll get to in a second, Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda obviously was an organization. They were the organization that planned and committed the September 11, 2001 attack on the World Trade Center. So, continuing, planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th, or harbored such organizations or persons. So, stop there for a second. So, it's not just the nations, the organizations, or the persons that he determines, that the president alone, the president determines planned, authorized, or committed the attack on September 11th, but anyone who harbored those people. That obviously includes Iraq and Iran, because Iran allowed members of Al-Qaeda to enter and to stay inside Iran. So Iran fits the criteria. Now, this last part is the really vital, important part. In order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. So the authorization is to use all necessary and appropriate force to prevent a future attack, not to get revenge or to get the people responsible for 9/11, but to prevent a future 9/11 by either the organizations, nations, or persons who committed 9/11, or the organizations, nations, persons who harbored the people who did that. And obviously, plain English, we're talking about the future. If you're going to prevent a future attack, it's not, well, to prevent future attacks for the next 5 years and then that's it, you stop and then we can have attacks after that. It's an open-ended authorization. So maybe some lawyer could argue with me. I don't claim to be a lawyer. And some of you by now may be thinking to yourselves, he's not much of a vlogger either. But be that as it may, reading this language just in plain English, it looks like it's open-ended. It doesn't apply just to something that happened in 2001. It's an open-ended authorization to prevent future attacks on the United States, which to me would, by the way, include attacks on our soldiers overseas or our embassies or any of our assets. To me, this is open-ended. It doesn't apply to any particular country. It's not limited to any particular time. It doesn't mention any particular restriction on what is considered necessary and appropriate force. And it is very clear to me from this, and it is very clear to me, in the plain English, this language, that the president, he determines who qualifies or what qualifies as a nation, person, or organization that planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored the foregoing. And that's it for today. Thanks for stopping by. As usual, thumbs up if you like this video. Share it with anybody you think would also like the video. Got any comments? You can put them in the comment section below the video. Good place also for any questions you might have, suggestions for future topics. You can also subscribe. I love getting subscribers. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. And finally, come back and see me again. I look forward to seeing all of you again. And until I do see all of you again, bye.